Okay, our topic is approach to polyuria. Before going to the topic, let's know some basics of diabetes insipidus. So, what does the word diabetes insipidus mean? Actually, the word diabetes means excretion of large amount of urine. So, what does insipidus means? Before knowing that, let's know what is diabetes mellitus. So, diabetes is polyuria. Mellitus in Latin means honey. Due to glucose in urine of diabetic patients, the urine tastes sweet. So they have named us diabetes mellitus. Here, why they named us insipidus means insipidus, the word insipidus means tasteless, which means the urine here is very dilute. It is neither sweet or nor salty. So they have named us diabetes insipidus. Let's know what are the four basic pathophysiology process in diabetes insipidus. First one is primary polydipsia. Second one is hypothalamic or central diabetes insipidus. Third one is diabetes insipidus of pregnancy. And fourth one is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Grossly, primary polydipsia is due to excessive fluid intake. And central diabetes is due to decreased synthesis or secretion of vasopressin. Diabetes insipidus of pregnancy is due to increased metabolism of vasopressin. And nephrogenic diabetes is due to renal resistance to vasopressin. So let's discuss the topics one by one. First one, we will deal with the larger topic, that is central diabetes insipidus. Let's discuss few of the common causes. Most common causes, neurosurgical conditions. Before going to the topic, let's know the physiological response to a complete stalk section. What happens here means they have found a pattern called triphasic diabetes insipidus. What happens here is that when there is a complete stalk section, that is the stalk connecting hypothalamus and posterior pituitary. So here we take 24-hour urine volume, and here we take post-operative day. Initially, there is day 1, day 6, day 12, and it goes on. Okay. Initially, there is absence of release of vasopressin due to complete stalk section. So in this phase, that is day 1 to 6, there is decrease in arginine and vasopressin. So there will be polyuria. No antidiuretic hormone, so polyuria. So after that, what happens is there will be sudden release of stored hormones from the posterior pituitary due to loss of regulation from the hypothalamus due to the complete stalk section. So suddenly there will be decrease in urine volume. So this causes retention and hyponatremia from day 6 to day 12. And again, when all stored vasopressin is lost, permanent diabetes insipidus will manifest. So we can divide the phases into 3 from 1 to 6 and 6 to 12. And after day 12, the first phase is diabetes insipidus, the last phase is permanent diabetes insipidus, and the interphase is antidiuretic interphase, during which patient may have hyponatremia. Okay. But this 3-phase need not occur in every condition. For example, let's consider a partial stalk section. So some amount of vasopressin continue to reach posterior pituitary from hypothalamus. So the first two phase, which occurs due to loss of vasopressin, need not occur. So this patient can develop only hyponatremia due to retention of urine caused by sudden release of excessive stored arginine vasopressin from posterior pituitary. So this can happen from day 6 to day 12. And this is a syndrome named after the effect, that is isolated second phase syndrome. So as we can remember better. So based on this physiology observed in rats also, can apply the same in our clinical scenario. So any neurosurgery patient, we are getting call over from neurosurgery ward after a transsphenoidal surgery or after a craniotomy. We can get call over like patient is having polyuria on day 2 or something till day 6. We can wait for we need not administer excess fluids in this case, because you have to wait till day 6 or day 7 with careful monitoring IO chart, because the patient may lead to retention of urine from day 7 to day 12, and we may worsen the hyponatremia. So similarly, we can get call over like in isolated second phase syndrome. The patient may not have polyuria on day 2 or day 7. This is another call over. The patient is only having hyponatremia. The call over regarding like the patient is having seizure and you order sodium, it is low. Now they are giving call over to the medicine department. Now you check the post-operative day, it is between day 6 to day 12. And now you know what is the physiology. So here also, we have to carefully monitor sodium till day 12, and we can check for the response of rise in sodium due after day 12. Okay, actually, transient diabetes insipidus is more common than permanent diabetes insipidus. It occurs in 50 to 60% of transsphenoidal and transcranial surgeries, whereas when they are doing open craniotomy, the chances of having permanent diabetes insipidus is more. Permanent CDA is more. Okay. Now we come across the second condition, that is cellular mass. Cellular mass can cause cranial, that is central. Some common conditions are craniopharyngioma. When it is very large and neurosurgeon has to resect extensively, they may disturb the posterior pituitary. Second one is METs. Any metastatic involving posterior pituitary can cause cranial diabetes insipidus. Third one is pituitary abscess. Fourth one is posterior pituitary. So there are 2 points to note here. One is METs. Usually METs involving posterior pituitary are very slow growing. So if the neurosurgeon is calling you again, complaining that the mass is growing fast, do we need to do anything in this patient having cranial diabetes insipidus? Means here we have to suspect a possible primary, sorry, I will change the topic. Actually, most primary tumors in pituitary region are slow growing. If the mass in pituitary region is fast growing, we have to look for primary somewhere else. That we need to keep in mind every time we see a case of cranial diabetes insipidus with a cellular mass. Third one is pituitary abscess. Okay. And another point we note here is, if a patient is having cellular mass, presenting with polyuria. One diagnosis is very least likely, that is pituitary adenoma. Pituitary adenoma almost never causes cranial diabetes insipidus. This point we should keep in mind. And the third one is granulomatous diseases. Granulomatous diseases can infiltrate posterior pituitary and can cause cranial diabetes insipidus. Examples are sarcoidosis, histiocytosis, etc. Here we have to treat the primary condition. Insipidus may not resolve with treatment. Fourth one is vascular or traumatic event. Here we discuss three things. One is SAH. Here, if patient recovers, mostly cranial diabetes insipidus will resolve after some time. It will not be permanent. Second one is clipping of anterior communicating artery aneurysm. If neuroscience is doing this procedure, patient may develop disturbances in osmoreceptors, since these are supplied by perforating branches of anterior communicating artery. These osmoreceptors are situated in anterior hypothalamus. So these patients can develop adipsic cranial diabetes insipidus. Please note, these patients, due to disturbance in osmoreceptors, they will be having decreased response of release of vasopressin in response to increase in osmolality, also decreased thirst due to disturbance of anterior hypothalamus and osmoreceptor. So they will be having no thirst in response to increase in osmolality in blood. So these patients should be carefully dealt with. We will deal on later about treatment. And also, traumatic brain injury can also produce triphasic response of polyuria. But here, the cranial diabetes insipidus will eventually recover. Now coming on to the topic adipsic diabetes insipidus. It can be caused by three incidents. One is when the surgeon is operating for a large craniopharyngioma, he may disturb both posterior pituitary and anterior hypothalamus. Now what happens? Posterior pituitary is gone, so there will be decrease in vasopressin. Okay. Now hypothalamus is also gone, so the patient will have loss of thirst. So this patient may develop adipsic diabetes insipidus. So another thing we have discussed just now, anterior communicating artery aneurysm. Here also, hypothalamus is gone, the patient will be having loss of thirst. Due to hypothalamus is gone, there will be no release of vasopressin from hypothalamus to reach posterior pituitary, and they develop diabetes insipidus. Third one is a gross hypothalamic syndrome can occur in the patient, which is associated with other symptoms of hypothalamic syndrome like hyperphagia, absence of thermoregulation, seizures. This is having high mortality. Okay, coming on to the next one. Next cause of cranial diabetes insipidus is genetic. We are discussing only two things here. One is familial CDI. In familial CDI, there is defective secretion of AVP. This is one of the autosomal dominant syndrome. So mostly it presents after birth during childhood. What we can do here is, if we know the patient is having, if we are suspecting familial CDI, we can take a MRI brain. Normally, the posterior pituitary shows stored vasopressin, which appears as bright spots in T1 sequence in 80% of normal subjects. So if you are suspecting a patient of familial CDI, we can follow up the patient with MRI brain. Initially, they may have bright appearance in posterior pituitary in MRI, but eventually there will be loss of bright appearance, bright spot in MRI when they develop familial CDI. So second one is, we have heard of, that is Wolfram syndrome. This is due to a mutation in Wolframin 1 gene in chromosome 4. This causes a syndrome called Ditt-Maud syndrome we knew of, that is diabetes insipidus, diabetes mellitus, optic atrophy, and sensory neural deafness. Here mostly diabetes insipidus is the last to occur, usually in the first to second decades. The next one is brain death patients. Cranial diabetes insipidus is precedes most brain death patients in almost 50 to 90% of the patients. It might be associated with the rise in intracranial pressure. Idiopathic, this is more common. Here they found that most of the idiopathic patients are having some of the autoimmune pathology which are unknown, which creates antibodies to vasopressin. Or sometimes cranial diabetes insipidus may be associated with other autoimmune conditions, especially thyroid patients. So we have discussed the numerous causes of CDI. This is a huge topic among this. Let's come straight to treatment of cranial diabetes insipidus. So what can we do in ambulatory patients? Remember, these patients are having normal thirst response. So even the water intake in this patient self-regulates. That is, whenever the patient is having polyuria, they can take sufficient water to prevent increase in osmolality or increase in sodium, that is hypernatremia. But if they are still complaining, we can try the drug, that is desmopressin. So whenever we are giving the drug, we have to maintain a balance between water intake and desmopressin by maintaining weight or fluid shot, which we can advise the patient. So what is desmopressin? It is also called DDAVP, that is desamino. Actually, AVP is a nonapeptide, that is contains 9 amino acids. Here we remove the amine from the first amino acid, and the second D denotes we add arginine at 8th place. Why we are doing this means, this removal of first alanine group, first amine group, increases the half-life of the DDAVP, because it's having very small half-life. Actually, arginine vasopressin, the half-life is only 10 minutes. So we can increase the half-life by removing the amine group at position 1. At position 8, we can add arginine to increase selectivity of action at V2 receptor, and it reduces the vasopressor action of vasopressin. These two changes actually make this drug almost 2000 times more potent than arginine vasopressin. And there are some recommendations for this drug and dosages. One is, it should be taken 1 to 2 hours before, 1 hour before meal or 2 hours after meal, to prevent degradation before absorption by some intestinal peptidases. The usual dosage is 0.1 mg to 0.2 mg, 2 or 3 times a day. There are so many other routes, IV, nasal, which are not commonly used. So that's all about treatment in ambulatory patients. So what we can do in a hospitalized patient. So if a patient having known cranial diabetes insipidus is getting hospitalized, especially if he is vomiting, he cannot take desmopressin by oral route. At that time, close attention should be given to his fluid status. Also, there is increased chances of thrombosis in this patient. The patient may have volume loss due to the infection, which may precipitate thrombosis. So anticoagulation should be considered whenever the patient is hospitalized. Coming to next scenario, that is in neurosurgery patients. Here we discussed few things already. One more thing is, if patient is presenting with polyuria on almost day 0, they suggest a physiology is that during the stress of the surgery, there will be increased release of vasopressin, which causes transient retention of urine in the patient. Sorry, transient retention of some volume in the patient. So when the surgery is over, the patient may be having polyuria. So at this time, we should keep in mind that we should not overload the patient with volume, especially isotonic fluids like 5D, because the patient may continue to have polyuria even after his normal physiology due to our extra volume, and it will cause us a confusion that is created by us iatrogenically. So this should also be kept in mind. Other things about neurosurgical patients we have already discussed. So coming to the next one, that is adipsic cranial diabetes insipidus. Here we should be more careful about the dosage and volume of fluid patient is having. Here we should be very, very careful, because these patients have no thirst response. And so if the patient is suddenly decreasing his dosage of desmopressin, the patient may have decreased antidiuretic response, the patient may have polyuria, and the patient may not develop thirst in response to increased osmolality, and the patient can develop severe thrombotic manifestations. Similarly, about the volume of fluid, the patient is suddenly doing some exercise but not maintaining adequate volume. The patient is not developing any thirst. The patient may develop thrombotic manifestation. So here we should maintain a dosage schedule along with intake schedule, and the patient should be strictly educated about it. And these patients also should be anticoagulated whenever they get admitted. So that's all about the treatment of cranial diabetes insipidus. So coming to the next cause of diabetes insipidus, second cause. The next causes are very small. We can discuss briefly. That is some cause of primary polydipsia. It can be due to structural brain lesions, like here also craniopharyngioma can cause, sarcoidosis can cause increased intake of fluid. Second cause is more common than the first cause, that is drugs, especially anticholinergic drugs. What causes dryness of mouth, which leads to increased intake of fluids. And third cause is much more common, that is idiopathic. These patients may have associated psychiatric illness, or it may be habit of the patient. So what's the treatment for these patients? Here, pharmacological therapy is not useful. So we should give no drugs. We can try withdrawal of drugs, which can cause dryness of mouth in these patients. Otherwise, we can try decrease in fluid intake by advising them in a graded fashion. The last resort is we can give them some candy or ice chips to keep their mouth hydrated actually. So coming to the next topic, next cause, that is third cause of diabetes insipidus, that is diabetes insipidus of pregnancy. This is actually, there will be hormone called cysteine aminopeptidase, otherwise simply called oxytocinase. What this hormone does is it degrades the oxytocin secreted in the pregnant women so that they will not land up in early labor. But sometimes this enzyme overacts in some patients and degrades AVP also due to close structural similarity with oxytocin. So these patients may develop diabetes insipidus during pregnancy. So what is the treatment? Treatment of diabetes insipidus. Desmopressin is the only treatment advised during pregnancy. Why? There is two reasons. One reason is, compared to arginine vasopressin, it has less than 20% of oxytocin activity. So there are very less chance of precipitating labor. Second reason is why we are prescribing desmopressin is it is not destroyed by oxytocinase. That's all. And most often these patients will recover after delivery of baby. So coming to the fourth cause, this is also a short topic. It is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. It is due to, it is having two causes. First one is congenital. Congenital is due to mutation in V2 receptor or aquaporin 2 channel. First one is mostly X-linked recessive. And there are three types in this. We need not go into detail. The second one is coporin 2 mutation. This is mostly autosomal recessive. So these two causes resistance to arginine vasopressin. Even though the patient is secreting arginine vasopressin, they may not have the effects of antidiuresis. So they will present as polyuria. But the arginine vasopressin levels in these patients will be high due to feedback mechanisms. So what about acquired causes? Most common is due to drugs, especially due to lithium, demiclocycline, etc. Lithium is the prototype drug causing nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Which can be treated with amiloride because it specifically blocks sodium channel through which lithium also gets reabsorbed. So coming to the treatment, in congenital patients, overall the treatment of nephrogenic diabetes is simply adequate water intake to prevent the complications of increased osmolarity or hyponatremia. That is that. To add on, in congenital, we can try low sodium diet or thiazide diuretics. Here what they say is these causes volume contraction. So the patient may improve in their polyuria. But some people say thiazide has a specific effect. That is, it can increase aquaporin 2 expression independent of the effect of vasopressin. Coming to acquired, I already told, here also we can try amiloride. Other thiazide diuretics. Amiloride is preferred in lithium-induced diabetics insipidus. Here, some people are saying Vaptans can be tried. What they are hypothesizing is that Vaptans can act as chaperones, which can correct the misfolded protein of V2 receptor. That is, it can correct the V2 receptor, they are saying, since it can act as chaperones, but these are under trials only. So coming to a core topic, that's the last and final. What is our approach now? So a patient is now complaining of polyuria to you. First thing, what is the first step we have to do is we have to confirm it, because patients having bladder infection, some bladder wall defects, or prostate abnormalities, or tubular injury, any disease causing tubular injury in resolving state, or solute diuresis. These things only cause increase in frequency, but not increased excretion of urine volume. So any patient who is complaining of increased urinary frequency should be advised to measure 24-hour urine volume. And we should rule out the possible causes of solute diuresis also. The most common is, we know, that is glucose. That is uncontrolled diabetes mellitus is the most common cause of solute diuresis. Other causes are mannitol administration, high protein diet, or any radio contrast media injected recently. These can also cause diuresis. So now you have measured 24-hour urine volume. If this is surely above 50 ml per kg or grossly more than 3 liters, now we can evaluate the patient for polyuria. So what do we do now? We already discussed the 4 causes. Now we have to classify our patient to between these, among these 4 causes. Now what we do is water deprivation test. So what we do in water deprivation test is that the patient should stop all forms of fluid intake, and we should get weight of the patient, serum sodium concentration, and plasma osmolarity before the start of the investigation. Now, patient is weighed after each liter of urine excretion. And urine osmolarity is serially monitored. If the patient weight decreases by 2% to 3%, or urine osmolarity that we are measuring every hour, the difference becomes less than 10%. So the urine is the patient's urine. We can assume that the patient urine has got maximum concentration. So we can stop the test here. Now we need to interpret the results. So if now the urine osmolality is 500 to 700, in Harrison it is given that 600 to 800 is the normal urine osmolality. Now first scenario is the patient is developing 500 to 700 the urine osmolality. It means he can concentrate the urine. So there is adequate vasopressin in his body and it can act on its receptor. So it is due to polydipsia, primary polydipsia. Now what is the second scenario? Still the patient's urine is dilute, that is around less than 250 milliosmoles. What can we do is we can measure his plasma vasopressin levels. If it is less than 5, sorry, if it is more than 5, it is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, which means there is adequate response of adrenaline vasopressin due to increase in serum osmolality, but it is not causing any effect on its receptor. Hence, patient still is having diluted urine. So it indicates nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. If the patient is having almost undetectable levels, it is cranial diabetes insipidus. So if we want to be sure of this result, sometimes we may confuse in between the two. We can try an additional technique. That is, at the end of this test, we can try administering hypertonic saline to reinforce the osmolality of his plasma and wait for 2 hours, and then we can check for his urine osmolality. What I want to convey is we can give hypertonic saline to reinforce these results. Another technique is we can further differentiate between the two by giving desmopressin injection. Here, even if we give desmopressin injection, there will be no change in urine osmolality. However, after 2 hours, cranial diabetes insipidus patients, they will show 50% change in urine osmolality. We take 4 points. That is, we should remember these physiologies while going to neurosurgery callovers regarding polyuria. One scenario is when you go on day 0, patient may have polyuria. Please wait and carefully monitor. Don't give excess fluids, especially isotonic saline. The patient may land up in iatrogenic confusion of polyuria, and maybe iatrogenic polyuria. Second scenario is the neurosurgical patient can have triple response, so you need to wait and may complain of polyuria between 1 to 6 days. So you have to wait whether he is developing permanent cranial diabetes insipidus. Isolated second phase response that we have discussed. Isolated second phase syndrome, which can cause hyponatremia. Here also we have to wait because these are due to only partial section of stalk. So eventually vasopressin secretion will resume and correct hyponatremia. Fourth one is any cellular mass presenting with polyuria. It is never pituitary adenoma. Another point I want to add upon this is usually cortisol and thyroxine increases GFR. This is the basic physiology. So whenever a patient having diabetes insipidus is coming to you with improvement, that is even reversal, please remember in back of mind, it can be transient diabetes also, but if the patient is developing hypothyroidism, if the patient is developing cortisol deficiency, it can also reverse diabetes insipidus. So you should keep it in this mind to check thyroid and cortisol levels when the patient is having reversal of diabetes insipidus. Thank you.